Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, along with CBS Sports Draft analyst Chris Trapasso. And Chris, I want to start out because it is mock draft season with he called it chaotic, blazing hot, fiery mock draft by one of the most credible draft analysts and mock drafters. Are you ready to break down the top picks of Daniel Jeremiah's latest mock? Are you prepared?
I'm prepared because he teased it the night before it came out, and it's like, okay, really, how chaotic is it going to be? You're Daniel Jeremiah. He usually doesn't stray too far from. I mean, he's kind of the guy that I always say that like sets the consensus. But this mock was just filled with truly a lot of chaotic things and developments. One of which pertains directly to the Vikings. So I'm definitely ready to break down that. And then maybe some other developments that went down in the first top half of the first round of this mock draft.
The Vikings made the headline of the mock draft on NFL.com. So that's how much involved they are. But we will start in Daniel Jeremiah's latest mock with the number 1 overall pick. Not chaotic, but exactly what we expect in Caleb Williams. I don't even think we really need to talk about it, Chris, because there's no world where they're not drafting Caleb Williams at this point, right? Like we've all decided it's locked in. There's not going to be a Trayvon Walker surprise at the end or something where the guy who's been locked into number 1 suddenly isn't, right? We're all set with Caleb Williams at 1.
Yeah, I am. And it seems like, I don't know if this is coming from anywhere. It's contrived from the league, but it kind of reminds me of like 2019 when like late in the process, it was like, Kyler Murray might actually just go play baseball. He doesn't want to play for the Cardinals. And it was like, yeah, okay, sure enough. Like he got picked by the Cardinals and he seems completely content there, even not having Cliff Kingsbury as his head coach anymore. So I think you can pretty much write that in Sharpie at this point, not even in pen, write it in Sharpie. It's going to be Caleb Williams to the Bears at 1.
Okay, no controversy there. But with the number 2 pick, Daniel Jeremiah mocking the Washington Commanders, Drake May. Now, we have talked about the Vikings as the potential Drake May target, or as Drake May is the potential Vikings target for whatever they're going to do with these 2 first-round draft picks that they now own. But if Washington is in for Drake May with the number 2 overall pick, I guess that takes that idea off the table. Where do you see Drake May fitting in with this? Because this is it was the consensus all the way through. And then we started talking about other possibilities, them trading out, them getting other players. But I think that May still is the favorite, unless you kind of do a little investigation and come to the conclusion that them getting rid of Sam Howell or them getting Marcus Mariota as their backup would point you toward Jaden Daniels. So who do you have at number 2?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts about this because we were in Indianapolis and you heard it, I heard it. The talk, besides the JJ McCarthy going to go higher than everyone thought, it was leading in with the Lance Zierlein comment, I believe, on Daniel Jeremiah's Move the Sticks podcast, like, oh, Drake May is going to be the one that has like a Will Levis or a Justin Fields-esque fall later than everyone thinks. So it was like beyond the McCarthy talk that week at the Combine, a lot of it was like, oh, it's going to be Daniels at 2, and then where does Drake May go? Which opened up those possibilities and was, I think, 2 or 3 episodes for us talking about what the Vikings would have to do to get to 4. Could he fall all the way to 11? It seems like at least the Vikings believe that they might have to get up into the top 5 to get that quarterback. And beyond that, it's like a whole new layer because I almost went into the middle of March thinking, all right, it's going to be Daniels at 2. And then we start to have, are the Patriots going to pick a quarterback? But if you're the Vikings, is it, oh, suddenly now Jaden Daniels is available? Like, we didn't really think that was going to be the case. Like, should we ultimately pick him? How much do we like Jaden Daniels? So it's really I don't want to say it's a true development because this is technically just a guess from Daniel Jeremiah, but this is not something that it felt like we were ready to need to explore like 2 weeks ago coming off the Combine. And now I think it is. But to me, I still think Jaden Daniels, like you mentioned, the Marcus Mariota, his running capabilities, Cliff Kingsbury as the offensive coordinator there, just being the offensive coordinator for Caleb Williams, who more resembles Jaden Daniels on the field than Drake May. I think it's still going to be Jaden Daniels. And I thought it was interesting, this kind of 180 that Daniel Jeremiah did. Is this just wanting to have some chaos with about a month to go to the draft? Or is he hearing something that all of that about Drake May was just maybe a team's effort to push him down the board?
Very well could be. It does seem that there is still some mystery here, but I tend to agree with you that, and of course, all of us could be wrong, but when you add up all those things, they would have no reason to pretend or to try to throw everyone off. Oh, let's hire Cliff Kingsbury, who worked with running quarterbacks, and we'll fool everyone. Like, they're drafting number 2. They have no one to fool here. And also with Drake May, I think it's worth bringing up that May and Sam Howell, at least from my understanding, have a relationship, and just, shipping off Sam Howell to bring in a running quarterback in Mariota. A lot of teams, most of the time, they want a similar backup quarterback. So when you have Kirk Cousins, you get Nick Mullins because it's that same kind of pocket quarterback. And if the Vikings were to draft Jaden Daniels, then, I don't know, because they've got Sam Darnold, but there might be a hint there even about Drake May, big armed, big guy, that kind of thing. So I don't know. I really don't. But I think that Daniels at this moment feels more like the number 2 overall pick, and we'll see. But Daniel Jeremiah didn't wait too long on Jaden Daniels. So for a guy who was calling for complete chaos, I'm not sure he totally went there, because he did go chalk with 3 quarterbacks and give the Patriots Jaden Daniels. I think the Patriots have a stronger argument for trading out with the Vikings than Washington does, because their team is so horrific, and they haven't done anything this offseason that was crazy to acquire some big star or something. They get, Kendrick Bourne comes back, KJ Osborne. These are just sort of classy receivers who can do their job. It's not like they went and got some $100 million player. I still think that it's possible that they pass up on a quarterback, but clearly the most obvious result of this top 3 is quarterback, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would be surprised if when the Cardinals go on the clock at 4, if 3 quarterbacks have not been picked back to back to back. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the Patriots. And of course, right now, just looking at the ammunition that the Vikings have, it seems like a pretty decent odds that that 3rd pick will be the Minnesota Vikings. That we've tweeted about it. We've looked at every single draft trade value chart, that 11 and 23 alone, and I know that there's a quarterback premium, but 11 and 23 alone get the Vikings to like between pick 3 and pick 4. So you throw in a 2025 3rd rounder or 4th rounder, whatever the case may be, to get up to the 5th or to the 3rd pick, and there you have it. So it's fascinating to me, because is it the Vikings made this trade because they have their sights set on one guy, or are they like, we like both of these guys, let's say Drake May and Jaden Daniels, and we just want to get to that number 3 spot? It kind of there's a lot of parallels for me to that 2018 draft class, where when the Jets moved from 6 to 3, there was a thought that they just liked pretty much all the quarterbacks. They were like, we like Baker Mayfield, we like Sam Darnold, we just don't know who's going to be picked first, and we're fine picking Sam Darnold, which is kind of crazy how that ultimately turned out. But is it just for one guy, or would the Vikings be like ecstatic, like, whoa, we weren't thinking it would be Jaden Daniels, and then suddenly, in this case, it would be?
Or there's another result that if they have their eyes on JJ McCarthy, maybe then he could be that guy either way, and they would get their choice. If Washington took May, they get McCarthy. If they take Daniels, they get May. What is your theory, by the way? Because there's lots of different ways to look at this with this trade as we get to the number 4 overall pick on Daniel Jeremiah's mock, which I will not delay on. He has McCarthy going to the Vikings in a trade up between the Vikings and the Arizona Cardinals. What is your theory on the holdup? Because there's a ton of different avenues, and one of them is that if they're trying to trade with the Patriots, that potentially the Patriots might want to go back and then back up. So go back to 11.
Like the Cardinals did last year.
Did. Yeah, right. So go back and then go back up to try to get their guy at number 4. There's also the idea that the Patriots might not want to make this move until pro days are over, until they get a good look at, these guys up close. Or there might be that the Vikings made this trade with the idea that they could move up, but nothing guaranteed and nothing locked in, and are just kind of taking their swing at it and could end up without a potential trade up altogether. So why don't we just stop here? Daniel Jeremiah has the Vikings trading up for JJ McCarthy. Now give me your thoughts on the Vikings, where they currently stand at 11-23.
Yeah, those reasons are really specific and they're good ones. Mine was just more general why we haven't seen that second trade for the Vikings. It's just the fact, to me, to move to 3, there's a lot of, I think, moving parts there, that there could be, Gerard Mayo might want a quarterback, but Elliott Wolf, their new GM or their kind of de facto GM, doesn't want a quarterback. Robert Kraft's involved. But for me, if it's 4, which Daniel Jeremiah has here, I think the Cardinals are just potentially fielding a bunch of offers, because you have the Raiders at 13. You have the Giants at 6. I think if you're the Cardinals and their GM Monty Ossenfort, you have to think, well, which pick next year, if it would include a 2025 pick, is going to be higher in the draft? We've talked about it, that if the Vikings land a highly talented quarterback, there's a good chance that even that 2025 third rounder is going to be at the end of the third round. That's a lot different than if the New York Giants make that pick and JJ McCarthy's not very good next season and they're a top 10 team again, and they're maybe saying, hey, we'll give you our 2025 or our 2025 first round pick. I think that, to me, why we haven't seen the trade up yet, is that's the reason, because there's multiple teams, maybe even the Denver Broncos, that are, I think, kind of in a desperate situation, even though we're only going into year 3 with Sean Payton. Or year 2 or year 3? Why? Like, the years are totally blending together with me with Sean Payton. But anyway, two, that I think, I don't want to say he's on the hot seat, and then if the Broncos start off badly, that he would get fired. But I think their GM, George Payton, who's been around for a few more years, needs to get this quarterback situation right, especially with that huge dead cap hit that they're eating with Russell Wilson this year. So to me, it's just a lot of teams who are potentially calling the Arizona Cardinals, and they're just taking their time kind of feeling out which would make the most sense for their organization.
Yeah, all of that could play into this, but at the same time, if you're the Vikings and you make this trade with Houston without full confidence that you can get into the top 4, then I'm going to be a little confused, I think, because it's just so much smoke signals that they are going up to the top, they're getting their guy, and everyone is assuming that that's going to happen. And then any delay sort of opens up the door to another team just popping in and being like, oh, hey, we're the Giants, we'll give you more. Or where that's why I think the Vikings had to get this extra first round pick, because they had to be able to say, I know there are other teams offering you this many firsts, but we can give it to you now. And don't you want it now, Arizona and New England, to jumpstart your rebuilds? So this is what gives the Vikings that advantage.
Yeah, you know what? You saying it that way, it kind of makes me think that what I suggested earlier, that maybe it will be fascinating to see if the Vikings have multiple quarterbacks they like, or there's one guy. I'm going to go back to the 2018 draft class. It's a similar situation to what the Bills did. They were moving up the board from the 20s. They traded Cordy Glenn and an extra pick to the Cincinnati Bengals to move up. And then they didn't make the trade up to get Josh Allen right away. I think they were sitting there and they're like, we love Josh Allen. Maybe they liked one of the others. And they thought, okay, if he's there, we're going to make the move. So maybe the fact that we haven't seen this second trade come down, and as we get closer to the draft, if it doesn't happen, maybe that is what we can realize is the fact with the Vikings, that they love JJ McCarthy, they love Drake May, they love Jaden Daniels, and they're like, we're not going to force it. We're not just going to trade up to get a quarterback just to get a quarterback like Matt and Chris always suggest, but we love our guy. And if he's there, then we'll make the trade maybe on draft night when that team is on the clock like the Bills did. Otherwise, we're going to sit back and pick an edge rusher or do whatever at 11 and at 23. And maybe, like you've suggested in the past, maybe it's Michael Penix at 23. That's the fallback option. So that could be what you just laid out, kind of a hint that the Vikings may have just one guy, maybe two in mind. They're not going to make that move up to 4, say, and then, oh, crap, Drake May's not there, and we don't really like J.J. McCarthy, so now what do we do?
Give me your draft grade for the Minnesota Vikings if they were to do exactly what Daniel Jeremiah said. They use 11 and 23 and whatever change to go up with the Arizona Cardinals and draft JJ McCarthy. Well, how would you grade that?
Did he throw in what 2025 pick would cost, or would it not cost?
Let me see here. I don't think he was very specific about it. He just said, after the recent trade with the Texans, it seems the Vikings are situated to aggressively move up and draft Kirk Cousins' replacement. Cardinals trade down, bypassing a chance to pick the first receiver off the board, but address the position later in pick number 23. So he didn't say exactly, but we know it's some combination of 11, 23, and whatever else it takes.
I would give it a B-, and that might be a little nice. I mean, I like JJ McCarthy. He's my quarterback 4. I don't have him, of course, graded as highly, but I'm going to stick with my guns and how you kind of see it too, that if there is a quarterback you like, that's what you do. You get aggressive, make the move. We know the GM in Minnesota is totally aware of the analytics and how smart it is to trade back. He's done that before, but you do the opposite with a quarterback. So I think McCarthy, I kind of feel like I'm alone on an island that I kind of like JJ McCarthy. That I think in the right situation, he can be that better than he was in college type player, because the natural skills are there, and that there is some of that kind of natural improvisation that I certainly want to see. And how about the fact that just at Michigan, even if you don't like him, you're like, hey, he just kind of ran the offense and didn't really do much. And that's what he could do in Minnesota. Not that it would be the same run game, but in terms of the environment, we've talked about it a million times, he wouldn't have to come in and be Patrick Mahomes in year 2 and throw 50 touchdowns, and the offense is on his shoulders. So I think at his size, athleticism, the flashes of improvisation, didn't make a lot of mistakes in college, didn't have to. And I don't think he'd be put in a situation in this Kevin O'Connell offense where he would feel like, man, I got to put the ball in a lot of precarious situations to win this game.
See, I would give this an A because mission accomplished. And because my confidence in myself is not that high, because I feel the same way as a lot of people do about JJ McCarthy, which is I am a little more hesitant about him than maybe someone like Drake May. But at the same time, this was their goal. And if their goal was for this offseason to, if Kirk Cousins leaves, trade up, get a quarterback, and put that person into the situation and try to go win on his rookie contract, that's an A for me. Okay. Because we've seen even quarterbacks who have a lot of questions about them coming out that when put under this spot, we've even seen quarterbacks who are imperfect, like Baker Mayfield was one Chad Henne run away from the AFC Championship game. And how about, Carson Wentz winning 13 games for them, or most of 13 games before he got hurt and Nick Foles took over. There are so many examples. Even the Rams did not stay with Jared Goff long-term. He got them to a Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. There's so many examples of this working that I can't give it anything less than an A. But my next question, though, about this is Daniel Jeremiah. I'm going to scroll down to number 13, where Michael Penix goes to the Raiders. So allow me to ask you this question. Would it be better for the Vikings to pick JJ McCarthy at number 4? Or if Michael Penix, and I'm not confident in this, truly is a top 15 quarterback, would you rather have Penix at 11 and then Johnny Newton at 23, or some other defensive tackle or pass rusher or whatever at 23 and then have 2 first-round picks? Or would you prefer to have McCarthy at 4?
That's a fantastic question. I don't have them graded way apart. I do have McCarthy ahead of Penix, and I think it's what I always say whenever there is a trade up, even if there is a quarterback, is JJ McCarthy an extra first round pick better than Michael Penix? I would say no in that scenario. And that's, again, I'm coming and saying that I am the biggest trade down advocate besides when it's a quarterback. Go up and get your guy. But I'm also realizing that there is inherent risk when you do that. And there are a litany of the examples that have worked. There's a few that have not worked as well for those trade ups. So the draft navigation, I would be fine with it. But when you're looking at it from that perspective, and like you're saying, this is a mock where Penix goes 13. It'll be interesting to see, is this where Daniel Jeremiah keeps Penix, like kind of in the middle of the first round? Like, is this a hint at what he's hearing? Or could the Vikings, like I suggested earlier, like in an alternate universe, maybe get Michael Penix at 23 and get like a blue chip prospect at 11? Because to me, I don't think there's that big of a disparity between those two, where trading 2 first rounders to get to 4 for McCarthy compared to Penix, it's a little bit closer, in my opinion. The only thing that might separate it a little bit is the age difference. That JJ McCarthy, I believe, is not even 22 years old yet. Michael Penix, the injuries, and where he is age-wise would make it a little bit scarier for me in that situation.
Right. And so I guess in my mind, so there's a wild card factor here, and that's Kevin O'Connell. If it was Rick Spielman making the pick, then in this scenario, I might go, maybe you should have just waited and taken Michael Penix, because it's Rick Spielman. And not only that, but he's not a former quarterback. He's not the guy. When Mike Zimmer was the head coach, he wasn't going to be the guy with the headset who needs to be in lockstep with his quarterback. In this case, Kevin O'Connell absolutely has to be 100% locked in, 100% bought in, because that's going to permeate through the whole franchise. I mean, if there's word that O'Connell really didn't want the guy that they pick from anybody, even if any whispers got out with that, that's dangerous. Like, you don't want that. You don't want they just kind of settled. They got the guy that O'Connell and McCown were totally bought into as their franchise quarterback, and everybody could all just, sing Kumbaya, JJ McCarthy is our guy around the campfire. If you wait and then it's Penix and then O'Connell's like, I wanted McCarthy and you didn't make it happen, that's where you start to get into the headbutting and so forth. I don't want any of that. But from a philosophical standpoint, if a quarterback is taken at 4 or 13, what are the actual odds difference? It's probably not that much as far as being picked in those two spots, because that's kind of the difference between like Mitch Trubisky and Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, and it's easy for me to say like, oh, well, if they could get Michael Penix at 13 or 23, but under the gun when you're on the clock, the Vikings would have no guarantees of that happening. So even if they're like, we love JJ McCarthy, but our GM is kind of a wheeler and dealer. He wants to see, check the trade, the pick value charts, and could I move back and maybe get our 1B or our 2A in Michael Penix? You don't know that he's going to be there. You don't know if the Broncos are in love with him and they pick him at 12, or a team trades up in front of you at 23. Those are the things where it's like that feeling where you get sniped in a fantasy draft. Imagine if you're the GM and it's a real player like snagging your guy right in front of you, and you're like, oh my God, that was our plan B. And now what are we going to do at quarterback? So I think you're right that it's easy for us to say this and look at a mock and say, well, what if this happened? But I do think you have to bake that into the whole draft navigation process, where maybe you just go up and get your guy. And that's why, again, I've, especially for quarterback, been very much like, you pick out your quarterback, and the Vikings are uniquely suited to know exactly what they want based on their coach and their offensive coordinator, their quarterback coach, like you mentioned, that if you identify who that guy is, go up and get him, and really don't have to, tell anyone any reason why, and don't be ashamed about it, because especially when you have a head coach that was a former quarterback.
Right. I would feel the same way. I would be in support. Practically speaking, in practice, I would be in support of getting McCarthy and trading the extra first, as opposed to if they were to take Penix at 11, knowing that maybe the Raiders would want him, or if he's a first round prospect. But look, I mean, if they end up with 11 and 23, I'm just going to have questions, because it's going to look like if they don't get a trade up here, it's going to be like, so you guys tried and couldn't, and then had to settle for what was there. And that, right, so that doesn't mean the guy's going to fail. It just means that's a little uncomfortable. And then if you're waiting around to 23, that would be quite terrifying. He also has Bo Nix not as a first-round prospect. And sometimes with these guys, I'm like, so is Bo Nix good or not? Like, can we all as a world decide? I mean, just like, because in previous mocks, he's in the top 15 going to the Broncos. Now the Broncos are getting a tight end, which I think would be weird. But not everybody who needs a quarterback is going to land a quarterback. Is Jarrett Stidham going to play for the Broncos? Like, what is going on here? Right? If that's not the case.
Yeah. Giants at 6, Vikings at 11, Broncos at 12, Raiders at 13. And I know that the Raiders signed Gardner Minshew and they got decent return on Aiden O'Connell last year as a rookie. There's just, for as good as his quarterback class is, with the Bears and the Commanders almost locked into quarterback, there's just not enough quarterbacks in this class for like, okay, everyone just gets their quarterback and everyone's good. So there probably will be a team, especially after the first round, that maybe is just like, look, maybe we've called the Patriots, we've called the Cardinals. The cost is too prohibitive to move up. Let's hope for Bo Nix in round 2, or Michael Pratt from Tulane in round 3, or Spencer Rattler in round 3 or round 4, because there probably will be someone that is left out. What is good for the Vikings, and like you're mentioning, it seems as though they're doing their best to be like, we don't want to be the team that's ultimately left out of this quarterback class that Kwesi has said, oh yeah, we started scouting this class like a full year ago to prepare ourselves for this moment.
Right. And overall, I think this result, what Daniel Jeremiah has, remains the most realistic for the Vikings, that they will end up getting to 4. They will end up taking JJ McCarthy, but it is not decided yet. And it's also possible that part of the holdup is, look, if you, and we don't know this because Kwesi hasn't called me and told me about every phone call, but imagine if you called Arizona and they said, all right, we'll do that deal with you. And say, okay, but let me check with New England first. And New England says, how about you call us back like April 12th after we have gone to JJ McCarthy's pro day, and after we've gone to Drake May's pro day, and after we've had our final meetings where we set lock in our board and all those types of things. And that might be the case. Or gosh, man, if this goes to draft night and the Vikings on draft day are 11-23 still, Raj goes up to the podium, and he's like, Caleb Williams off the board. And we're going, are they going to stay at 11? What's going on? Like, the drama of this with this trade with the Texans has just ramped up to now every day. I'm like, got the alerts on. When is this going to happen? But it is not crazy to think that it could be all the way up to draft night.
Well, it did happen with the Bills. And I remember sweating that 2018 draft. Like, are they just going to, I think they were at 16 and it was like, are they just going to sit there? No, they're going to trade up, right? And it was like, which quarterback? And a lot of people wanted Josh Rosen, me included. But that went right until the Cardinals were on the clock at 7. It was like, oh, there's a trade. Like, they're going to pick one of these quarterbacks. Definitely was par for the course for the Bills to just make it be as nail biting as possible. And I think for the Vikings too.
Hey, by the way, the whole way we view this entire offseason just hinges on this one thing.
It does.
So no big deal or whatever, right? But again, it could happen. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen draft night. And guess what? We're going to talk about it all the way up until then. So one of the things you and I have done every year is we have looked at the quarterback class and we have made 90s/early 2000s quarterback comparisons. And we have reached that point. And also, people can look forward to when we make our bust comparisons. It's the episode that everyone loves to hate when we make our bust comparisons.
Especially because a lot of people think that those are our true comparisons for all of the quarterbacks or the players. And you got to be like, no, these are just, if they are bust, they will resemble ... So that's just, I'm putting out that it's not this episode, but when we do it, it's not our, like, we don't think all these quarterbacks are going to be like Jamarcus Russell, Ryan Leaf-esque bust.
I love to look, when you write the article on this, I love to look at the responses and people telling you this guy's not like that guy and he's going to be better and everything. But the reality is that there are busts. But in this case, we're not going busts. We're going 90s comps. And in my mind, it was the guy who he reminds me of the most that worked out. Like, I'm not going with,
sure. Yep,
like
same.
you said, oh yeah. Caleb Williams is Jamarcus Russell. Like, that's not something we're going to do here. So I'm going to kick it off with Caleb Williams. And my Caleb Williams comp is Donovan McNabb. Ooh. I think that he is a talented playmaker who is very, very gifted with arm talent and physical skills that will have some flaws. And that's how I looked at Donovan McNabb, one of the great quarterbacks of a generation, and probably got unfairly criticized. I mean, my gosh, he went to the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl, and there was always, because you play in Philadelphia, you get hammered. But I think that there's a lot of similarities, that McNabb was a great running quarterback, but it wasn't his only thing. It wasn't like he was Vic. And his football could be a little, inconsistent on short and easy passes, but also he could drop crazy dimes. So that's who I'm going with, Donovan McNabb for Caleb Williams. And if the Bears hit on him, they're probably going to be really good for a long time if they get the Donovan McNabb type player.
Yeah,
so who'd you have for Caleb Williams?
Donovan was so underrated, even though it was like real football fans were like, yeah, he's good, but it felt like the local, that notorious Philly sports radio just like hammered him all the time if they weren't going like 14-2 every year. Anyway, I'm not doing this on purpose to kind of go with, I don't want to say a bust comp, but when you hear the name, it's not a Donovan McNabb level player. But I thought of this in my head, then I went back to watch on YouTube, and there are highlights of this player from the, I believe, early 2000s. And the first like quote from a broadcaster is, trying to tackle this quarterback is like trying to guard Allen Iverson one-on-one. That is Seneca Wallace from Iowa State, who played Seattle Seahawks, a few other teams. And when I went back to watch, I was like, I want to make sure I'm not like totally off on my memory here. He was doing like Caleb Williams-esque stuff, just the NFL was not ready for that. He was little. He was throwing across his body. There's a run about a minute into that highlight. If you literally just type in Seneca Wallace highlights from Iowa State, where he like runs to the right, pump fakes 3 times, and then reverses his field and runs all the way back like 30 yards for a touchdown. His arm strength was nowhere near Caleb Williams. He wasn't as prolific of a passer in terms of like completion percentages stuff. But to me, with Caleb Williams, for as good as he is inside the pocket, the Patrick Mahomes comparisons obviously come from everything that he does, the reversing his field, throwing it as he's getting near the sideline between 3 guys. Seneca Wallace did a lot of that stuff at Iowa State. He was just way, way too early. So I get Seneca Wallace vibes from him, but of course, Caleb Williams is a much more prolific passer, mostly just because of the arm strength and the accuracy that he has.
So I can imagine the comment section with this take. But I will say this, that if someone like Seneca Wallace, and you'd have to remember it, if they were coming out now, they would just get a lot more attention than they did then, because that it just wasn't the style of quarterback that the NFL was looking at. And really, I mean, when you, and here's the proof, Lamar Jackson went 32nd overall.
Yeah.
And so even up until
6 years
Mahomes
ago,
and Lamar Jackson, right, there was a lot of questioning of quarterbacks who scrambled around, quarterbacks who made crazy plays, were inventive. A lot of it was, well, he doesn't really play pro football. That's a college quarterback. That was how, Doug Flutie ended up in the CFL, because teams thought, oh, he runs around too much. Running quarterbacks can't win, that whole type of thing. So people will say that you're insane because this quarterback did not end up working out, except for on every Madden season I ever used him. But I do think that if there was somebody who was playing to his creativity and playing to his strengths in the year 2024, that Seneca Wallace is a guy who, just if he came along in a different era, may have been a great NFL quarterback. So let's take a look at Drake May. And the reason we extend into the early 2000s is basically so I can use some of those comps that more people remember, honestly, than the 90s quarterbacks. I think with Drake May, the old school comparison is early Eli Manning.
That is so good.
Not old Eli Manning, not like just decrepit, can't really move anymore, doesn't have the same arm strength. Not the one you remember from 2016. The 2004, 5, 6, 7 Eli Manning. He is big. He is very wild with the football, like willing to take whatever risk that it takes. You could see him throwing 5 picks in a game, as Eli Manning once did against the Minnesota Vikings. But you also, the size, and Manning was not a runner, but early in his career had mobility, like would scramble around and make plays and stuff like that outside of the pocket. And I think also, similar to Drake May, it might take some patience. in working through that guy and, the way that he plays. So I see some stylistic comparison, the size, the arm strength. So that's who I'm going with is early. Again, that is to be made clear, early Eli Manning, not Peyton Manning, Eli Manning.
That's the one. And had you not told me that before we went on the air, like I would have gravitated toward that one because it's so good. And beyond like the 5 interception game that we could maybe see from Drake May, we saw from Eli. Then like Eli Manning, like the next week would throw for 350 yards and it would be like he forgot already that he threw 5 picks the week before against a better defense or a worse defense. That's the kind of up and downs that you get with Drake May, but I'm going to go with Jake Plummer and more like college Jake Plummer in that he elevated that Arizona State program. They played in the Rose Bowl against a loaded Ohio State team that had like a bunch of future NFL guys on it, could run around a little bit, had a strong arm at the college ranks, and for a short while was a pretty capable starter in the NFL. Similarly big, like was certainly not hindered by his size and was willing to throw his body on the line on 3rd and 7 and dive to get that first down. I feel like Drake May, and we've talked about it, like can be awkward sometimes with his improvisation, but kind of gets the job done. When he was in Denver, that's kind of how Jake Plummer was, where it never looked like, oh, that is picture perfect textbook, but he got the first down and they won the game. And this was not a great team. And he's in the playoffs, kind of that gamer mentality. That's kind of how I feel about Drake May elevating that North Carolina program. And then still playing well last year after losing Josh Downs to the Colts in the 3rd round, his kind of star receiver that caught a ton of passes out of the slot. Drake May, Jake Plummer, just guys that will get it done and have some pretty good traits to go along with it too.
Yeah, I mean, Jake Plummer was a really phenomenal athlete with huge arm talent and played with one of the worst franchises. I mean, people do not understand. If you think Arizona's bad now, I mean, that 80s and 90s Arizona was unbelievably
for
bad.
A long
and
time,
they had like, right, Chris Chandler, Steve Bierlein, like all sorts of journeyman quarterbacks that they could never make work. And Plummer was supposed to be that guy, struggled there, goes to Gary Kubiak and Mike Shanahan, has a lot of success there, as so many people often did. So that's a fun comparison of a guy who's toolsy and might take some time to figure it out. Now, this one, it's hard to be creative with Jayden Daniels. It is. So I'll let you go first with your Jayden Daniels comp. We might have the same exact one because there's just not that many guys from that era who played in this style. It'd be easier to make comparisons now. Although, I mentioned to you that I've been watching Spielman's podcast, and Spielman was talking on CBS, and he was talking about Daniels, and he says, I've got a comparison for Jayden Daniels. So I'm like, oh, okay, let's hear it. This should be interesting. And he goes, Lamar Jackson. I'm like, okay, come on. Like the most obvious, like, come on, Rick, you can do better than that. But it is actually hard to do better than that because there are few guys who actually run this effectively. So who did you go with Jayden Daniels?
Yeah. And that's kind of why the Seneca Wallace one I went with for Caleb Williams, because there's not a lot of Caleb Williams comparisons like from the 90s and the 2000s, because there's just quarterbacks weren't allowed to do that even in college. And if they did, like Seneca Wallace, they never really made it in the NFL. For Jayden Daniels, I think I said this a couple episodes ago, so I apologize if I already spoiled it. I went with Randall Cunningham. Different, like kind of different body types, but he was tall and lanky, kind of like Jayden Daniels. He ran around a lot, and he was a big time athlete for the quarterback position in his days in the 80s and the 90s. And there were a bunch of, there's actually a famous one against the Bills where he like eluded Bruce Smith in the end zone and then like threw it deep down the field. The Bills had the red end zones. It was like the AstroTurf. The Eagles are in the Kelly Greens. It's like a obscurely famous play that we were like, whoa, Randall Cunningham just like eluded Bruce Smith in his prime and then dropped a dime deep down the field. And I always remember Cunningham, even later in his career with the Vikings, was such a good downfield thrower. Like underneath, intermediate level, could be scattershot, but like maybe it was just because he had Randy Moss and he had Chris Carter. But it was like, man, he could drop it in the bucket as well as any quarterback in the league. That's kind of how I feel about Jayden Daniels. He can run around, and his deep ball accuracy is very good. So that's who I went with for Jayden Daniels.
So I think Randall Cunningham is the the clear choice because of the running being so spectacular
Mm-hmm.
that it is very difficult to find guys who can run that well. And I'll give you some other considerations that I had. The difference between Randall Cunningham and Jaden Daniels to me is velo. Like Randall Cunningham could throw the ball as hard as anyone in NFL history. I guarantee
Big wind up too. Huge wind up.
Just laser beams. I don't see that from Jaden Daniels. I see accuracy down the field, but I don't see laser beams in the same way that, like you said, that play against Bruce Smith where he dodges him in the end zone. I think he throws the ball like 65 yards in the air.
After that.
In Ralph Wilson's state. Yeah, after that. Because you could tell he's in the end zone and he throws it to the other like 45. So it's like, whoa, that's like 60 yards in the air in the mid play in Ralph Wilson Stadium. That's insane. Rich Stadium at the time. Mm-hmm. But I was trying. And you come up with some of the obvious ones like Steve McNair, better, I don't know about that. Like, Steve McNair is
different body type too.
But like Steve McNair didn't have a laser. I don't think. No. Steve McNair was accuracy more than he was. And the thing was that McNair was shorter, but he was a house. Like if you try to take him down, he was a kind of a fire hydrant. That's not Jaden Daniels. The other one I thought of that would be the highest end of the highest end would be Steve Young, who was a great scrambler and could run for an 80-yard touchdown as he did once against the Vikings and was very accurate and learned to play within his system and so forth, but was a little wild at the beginning of his career and more of a playmaker and scrambler than he was what you remember at the end. But there's just, look, the NFL has changed. And I was hunting up and down, left and right, trying to find anybody who could be like him. The other one would be, and again, doesn't have the hose of this guy, Skinny Dante Culpepper was the other one.
Wait, what about, I know this is not,
it's hard.
It's technically, if we're cutting off at like 2009, then maybe this doesn't count. What about RG3?
Yeah, I could see that.
RG3, like he was a spindly runner, was great with his downfield touch at Baylor, had great receivers at Baylor, so it kind of helped it out a little bit. Took a lot of shots in the open field. They kind of hurt him a little bit. Could be RG3, but that is sneaking into into the 2010s, being that it was 2012.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, there's just such a smaller sample of players to work with than for someone like JJ McCarthy. Now, I like my JJ McCarthy comparison, so I'm going to give it to you first. I am going to go with Matt Hasselbeck. That was it. Did I get the same one as you? Is that the same guy? Because this is
exact same.
All right. Well, look, I mean, this is a guy who didn't throw for crazy numbers, won a bunch of games, and did it with some playmaking ability. Because Hasselbeck was a better playmaker than I guess maybe you'd think. From someone that didn't have the greatest physical tools, run first kind of offense with Seattle. I mean, I don't think you have to squint too hard to see a Matt Hasselbeck type of quarterback in JJ McCarthy.
Yeah, that's who I had written down. I'm trying to think of another one, but he's good in that there was that stretch, if you look back, and it obviously culminated with them getting to a Super Bowl where like the NFC West was kind of like a wasteland. There was like the 49ers were not very good. The Rams were not very good. And it was just the Seahawks would just win the division every year, go 10-6, 11-5. And Hasselbeck was like top 7 in quarterback rating, never threw for like 5,000 yards, never threw 40 touchdowns, but it was just like so steady for so long. And you're like, oh, I can see it kind of. He's not really that amazing, but just got the job done, could hit the post down the seam, maybe a deep corner route every once in a while. That's kind of the vibe that you get if you're envisioning JJ McCarthy. Like, hey, if it works out, it could look a lot like Matt Hasselbeck did in those, early to mid 2000s Seahawks teams.
I'll give you my other one. My other nomination was Mark Brunell, except for right-handed Mark Brunell. Because Brunell, I thought, had a pretty strong arm, really good athlete, definitely a playmaker, could get in space, quick feet, wasn't like a rocket, but was like really quick feet and had great receivers. And that's what JJ McCarthy will have if he comes to the Vikings. So maybe there's a comp there. So now let's get into the other two guys. I really like my Michael Penix comp. So I'm going to let you go first because I am in love with my Michael Penix comp. So
all right. Ahead. I feel like you've given this one before, and the fact that you're introing it or you're kind of foreshadowing. It makes me think we might have the same one. With Michael Penix, different, not a lefty. I'm going with former number 1 overall pick Jeff George, who had an
okay, this is different.
Had an absolute cannon. I mean, he it's like if you Google like biggest draft bust, you'll find Jeff George on a lot of lists because he played for like 50 teams. He just played everywhere, and he never was really that good. And I don't think that Michael Penix, he does not like now have the same like seismic impact that George did, which I don't remember this per se, but I've gone back to look that like George coming out of Illinois was like, this guy has like Dan Marino's arm. Like he is on another level. We don't feel that way with Penix, but we do agree. I think everyone agrees. Like he has a cannon. Like he throws the football down the field and even on a 15-yard dig route as hard as anyone in this class, maybe outside of Joe Milton. But kind of a little scattershot at times. But then every once in a while, it's whoa. That was a 4. And I've looked it up. I did it last night. Look up Jeff George's best throws in the NFL. There are some Brett Favre-esque throws on there where you're like, Jeff George did that? I don't remember that. Like 40 yards between the safety and the corner down the sideline as he's getting hit. I could see Penix making some of those throws in the NFL. George was maybe a little bit better of an athlete, but he was not, I don't remember him at least, running around a crazy amount. It's kind of the same way with Penix. That Penix is not a total statue. He can move a little bit. But the arm talent and just the ability and the want to just throw rockets all over the field. That's how I landed on Jeff George for Michael Penix.
So when you said former number 1 overall pick, I thought we were going to pick the same player because I took another number 1 overall pick and on Jeff George. Jeff George has one of the great highlight reels ever. It's just that the consistency element of Jeff George was not really there. But as far as highlight reel laser beams, that I look at his throws that break the camera. Like whoever the cameraman is cannot keep up with the football. It's moving so fast. Yeah. And that's what he had. I went with Drew Bledsoe, the purest of pure pocket passers. This guy never moved off his spot ever. And Penix is the same way. Like he does not move off his spot. He just stood there and he just let it rip and let it rip and let it rip. And you know what? It wasn't always the most accurate. Sometimes he would be a little wild with some of his throws. And if you got people around Drew Bledsoe, he did not like that. Mm-hmm. It did not like that at all. And when he would play against the Bills, I would never be super terrified because I was like, well, you can get to him. And I think it's the same way with Michael Penix. Like Bledsoe is taller, but Penix has that same like super long arms, huge hands. When Drew Bledsoe would hold a football, it looked like me holding a tennis ball. And it was, his hands were so gigantic. So I thought that there's a very similar vibe to those two players. And how good Drew Bledsoe would have been in today's game, like I don't know, because of the lack of mobility and so forth. So I like that one.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I guess I should have thought of that one. Their statures were a little different. Like you're saying, Bledsoe was, I think, a little bigger and like wider, but it's not like Penix is small. Like he's not 6'1", 190 pounds. He has decent size, but in terms of just throwing the ball and being like, look, I can't really move for you much, but I want to throw it 50 times a game. I believe he had a game, didn't he, with the Bills where he threw it like 58 times in like 2005 when like no one was doing that. I believe he still owns the Bills single game passing record, like 460 something. You could see, again, in the right situation, Michael Penix just having a game like that, and then also having a game where he gets sacked like 9 times.
Well, Bledsoe once against the Vikings in 1994 threw the ball 70 times in a victory over Warren Moon. Wow. Yeah, that happened. Last one is Bo Nix. Okay. I went, I'll go first on this one. I went with Jim Harbaugh for Bo Nix because he doesn't have any spectacular skill. Remember when they had those things where the guys would go to the Pro Bowl and they would throw the ball at the targets and stuff like that? I do
remember that. Yeah,
and they would do the longest throw, and Brett Favre would throw it 82 yards or something. And Jim Harbaugh would throw it 56. And they'd be like, what the heck? This guy's in the Pro Bowl. He threw like 56 yards. That is, I think, Bo Nix to me, where I think and Harbaugh would run and he was a playmaker, but he wasn't a spectacular one. And he kind of just had to grind it out by being smart, by being tough. and doing just enough to win games. And I think if you're projecting Bo Nix's future, I mean, kind of a quarterback who is good and could potentially start, but is not necessarily a 10-year franchise quarterback, is probably who you're looking at with somebody like Bo Nix. So that is my 90s comparison for him.
That's a good one. And if I remember correctly, was he not, Jim Harbaugh with the Colts, near Hail Mary catch away from going to a Super Bowl? I believe I watched that like at my cousin's house when I was like 6 in the Three River Stadium. Like the ball was right in the Colts player hand, but dropped it. So he was like pretty successful in the NFL. Like you said, he was in the Pro Bowl despite not being able to throw it 60 yards. That's a good similar vibe with Bo Nix. A lot of what you said, I was thinking, I was like, all right, I feel better about my comparison because I do like that one a lot. A lot of what you were describing describes my guy, I think. Alex Smith. I think in terms of maybe a little bit better of an athlete, but like had to win with smarts, had to win with accuracy, had to win with understanding where to go with the football. There was that Football Outsiders stat that they still use today, or I guess it's not Football Outsiders anymore, but Aaron Schatz called Alex, where it's like air yards less expected, like because he threw the ball short of the sticks more than like any other quarterback. I could see Bo Nix, and he was successful doing that, but there was always a in San Francisco, and then even early on in Kansas City, like a criticism that the media and their fans had, like, it's 3rd and 6. Oh, he's going to throw it 3 yards short of the sticks and hope that his wide receiver makes a play. I could see that being Bo Nix. Good athlete, can get out in space, scramble if you need him to, maybe keep the ball on read option. We know that Alex Smith was kind of like at the beginning of the read option with Urban Meyer at Utah. Again, maybe a little bigger, a little bit better of an athlete, but not a tremendously, I don't want to say he wasn't a gifted passer, but there were more gifted passers in the NFL during Alex Smith's prime, but he was actually pretty successful for a long time. And Bo Nix, to me, because of all the smarts, I could see him having a long career like Alex Smith because he's usually going to make the right decision. And for the most part, especially underneath, be pretty accurate with where he throws the football.
Right. And there's going to be some limitations, but I think he will be able to operate an NFL offense. And if he went in the first round, I wouldn't be totally shocked considering the numbers he put up and the way that he ran their offense, because I have talked to people who are talent evaluators who really like him and they call him a field general. And they're like, yeah, he's out there, he can make a play. So as usual, we're mystified by where these quarterbacks are going to go and what order. But that was really fun trying to do our 90s, 2000s comps, and we will get to our bust comps. Also, I think it's high time for a draft simulation. So next week, it might be time to simulate the draft. And I think the next time we talk, I may be coming to you from Orlando, Florida, doing at the owners meetings for next week when we do this podcast. So that'll be fun as well. Thanks so much for your time, Chris. Always a good time. And we are going all the way through the draft every week, Chris Trapasso Draft Show, and then of course, after the draft, we'll break it down as well. So always appreciate it, man. And we are 1 week closer to the NFL draft. Thanks for your time.
Football.